Hello, it's Rachel. Welcome to Smile English Stories, where you can listen to English in lots of different contexts. But you need to subscribe and hit the bell if you want to get a notification. Today, we are visiting Stratford-upon-Avon in the centre of England. And I am going to take you to the theatre. If I speak too slowly or too quickly, you can change the speed in YouTube. Theatre has been important in England for a long time. And probably the most famous playwright, a person who wrote plays, was William Shakespeare. Shakespeare was a very famous playwright and a poet and an actor. He wrote 39 plays and more than 150 poems. Shakespeare was born in 1564 in Elizabethan times. He was born and he grew up in Stratford-upon-Avon, which is a lovely little town, a beautiful town in the centre of England between Oxford and Birmingham. If you go to England one day, you should really visit Stratford, especially in the summer. You can walk along the streets of old half-timbered houses, and why not have a drink in one of the traditional pubs? Cheers! Or you could visit Shakespeare's birthplace, the place where Shakespeare was born. Stratford-upon-Avon means Stratford on Avon, because Stratford is built on or by the River Avon. So you should walk along the River Avon. You could have another drink in a pub by the river.
Cheers!
Or just admire the swans. You could take the little pedestrian ferry boat across the river to the Royal Shakespeare Theatre. The ferry is a chain ferry. So the ferryman or the ferrywoman pulls you across the river with the chain which is attached to the ferry. The chain is round a wheel on the side of the boat. So the ferryman or the ferrywoman has to turn the handle on the wheel to make the ferry move forward. Lots of famous actors have acted at the Royal Shakespeare Theatre. Who do you recognise? You could rent a narrow boat for 3 or 4 days. A narrow boat, not a wide boat. Stratford is connected to different canals in the UK canal system. And of course you need a plan for if it rains. You could visit the Stratford Butterfly Farm. It has waterfalls and tropical plants And of course lots of beautiful butterflies that sometimes come and land on your hand. And if you are feeling festive, you can go in the Christmas shop. It's called the Nutcracker. Like the story. And it's open 7 days a week. All year. Perhaps except Christmas Day. Shakespeare got married in 1582. He married a lady called Anne Hathaway. No, not that one. Anne lived in a beautiful thatched cottage on a farm just outside of Stratford. When they got married, Anne was 26 and Shakespeare was only 18. He was underage because in 1582 you were not an adult at 18, you were an adult at 21. So they needed a special license to get married. When Shakespeare and Anne got married, Anne was already pregnant. Oops. I say oops because in those days it wasn't really accepted to be pregnant and not married. So
baby Susanna
was born. And 2 years later, the Shakespeares had 2 more babies, twins. Judith, a little girl, and Hamnet, a baby boy. When Shakespeare was about 25 years old, he went to London. He moved to London to start a career in the theatre. First, he was an actor. He acted in a group or a company called the King's Men. The King's Men because now we had a king in England, not a queen. King James was King James VI of Scotland. But then, in 1603, he became King James I of England, Ireland, and Scotland. English history is very complicated, and King James I was the first king to rule over England and Scotland. So Shakespeare wrote comedies to make you laugh. Like A Midsummer Night's Dream, you might have seen my version of the story in another video. But he also wrote plays about history called histories, like the story of King Henry VIII and his 6 different wives. He was Queen Elizabeth's father. But Shakespeare also wrote tragedies, like the tragedy of Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark.
Oh no, it's Yorick. He was my friend when I was a little boy.
Hamlet's uncle killed Hamlet's father because he wanted to become king. So Hamlet got depressed. He wanted, or he thought about killing himself or committing suicide.
To be or not to be? That is the question. What do you think? Mandy? Mandy?
But then a ghost came to see Hamlet and said to Hamlet, "Hamlet, you should kill your uncle and then you can be king."
Etc., etc., etc.
Oh, the tragedy of the ambitious Macbeth of Scotland and his ambitious wife, Lady Macbeth, and the 3 witches who said that one day Macbeth would be king of Scotland, but that later his life would be very complicated. Bubble, bubble, lots of trouble. Fire burn and cauldron bubble.
Etc., etc., etc.
Or the romantic tragedy of Antony and Cleopatra. Mark Antony was a Roman soldier. He was one of the 3 leaders, the 3 rulers, the 3 bosses of the Roman Empire. And Mark Antony was in love with Cleopatra. Cleopatra was the queen of Egypt. She was a very beautiful woman. But the political situation between Rome and Egypt was just so complicated. Come, you poor mortal creature.
Etc., etc., etc.
Or perhaps the biggest tragedy of Romeo and Juliet, the star-crossed lovers. Juliet is like the sun. Romeo, why are you Romeo? It was so sad because they could not be together. They could not be together because their families were enemies.
Etc., etc., etc.
Shakespeare visited Anne, but there were 100 miles, that's about 160 kilometers, between Stratford and London. Today, it would take about 1 hour to drive to London from Stratford, or 3 hours if there is a lot of traffic. Or you could take the train. That would take 2 hours. But in the 1500s, in the 16th century, of course, there were no cars. People either walked or rode a horse. So for Shakespeare, it was a long journey. He would probably take 5 days to get to London and 5 days to come back to Stratford. In 1599, when Shakespeare was just 35 years old, he opened a theatre in London with 4 other actors. They called it the Globe Theatre. But I'll tell you about the Globe in another video. In 1611, when Shakespeare was about 47, he decided to go back to Stratford and live with Anne, his wife, and his family. Shakespeare died on his birthday when he was just 52 years old in 1616. He died in Stratford. You could visit the Holy Trinity Church where Shakespeare was buried. Shakespeare was very rich and very famous, so he was scared. But why? He was scared that people would dig up his bones and sell them for lots of money. So, on his tombstone, he put a warning. If you touch my bones, there will be trouble. But how did Shakespeare die? Was it for romance? Was it part of a tragedy? Or was it just part of history? It's still a big mystery. What do you think?
Etc., etc., etc.
Shakespeare wrote some fantastic stories in his plays, but they are in old-fashioned English, not modern English. But if you look on the internet and you want to read some Shakespeare, you can find simpler versions. I hope you learned something today. If you did, give me a thumbs up and share the video with somebody else who might like to listen to English. And I'll see you next time.